She thinks she's better than all of us, my mother-in-law announced to the entire dinner table, loud enough that the neighbors could have heard through the wall. She always has. I was sitting right there, holding my daughter's hand under the table because Gracie had been squeezing mine since we walked through the door. I didn't say a word. I've spent a lot of years not saying words, building things quietly while other people talked. That's how I work. It's how I've always worked. And the people in that house never once understood that about me. Or maybe they did, and that's exactly why they thought they could get away with it. Let me tell you what happened the week before Gracie's 7th birthday. And then I'll tell you what I did about it. My husband and I had been together for 9 years when things started to crack, not dramatically, that's what nobody tells you. It doesn't crack with a bang. It cracks the way an old house settles. One day, a door doesn't close right, then a window sticks. Then you realize the whole foundation shifted, and you just didn't notice because you were too busy keeping everything running. I was the one keeping everything running. I worked as a contract compliance officer for a mid-sized logistics firm. Boring title. What it actually meant was that I was the person companies called when they suspected someone inside had been skimming contracts, padding invoices, moving money sideways. I was quiet, methodical, and I did not miss things. That reputation had taken me years to build. My husband, I'll call him my ex-husband now, because that's what he is. He worked in commercial real estate. We met when I was 26, got married at 28, had Gracie at 28, had Gracie at 29. He was charming in a way that made you feel like the only person in the room. I know now that's just a skill some people have. It doesn't mean anything about who they actually are. His family had money. Old money, the kind that sits in the walls of a house and makes people feel like they're owed something by the universe. His mother, I'll call her my mother-in-law, had never worked a day in her adult life. His father had sold a manufacturing business in the 90s and coasted since then. His older sister had married into more money and considered herself an authority on everything from wine to child rearing to whether my kitchen curtains were an appropriate color. From the day I married into that family, I felt the low hum of their disapproval. Nothing loud enough to confront. Just the way my mother-in-law would mention, oh so casually, that Gracie's lunchbox looked a little worn, or the way my sister-in-law would ask, with wide, concerned eyes, whether I was sure I wanted to keep working such long hours. Or the way my father-in-law would look at me across the holiday table like I was a problem he hadn't yet figured out how to solve. I smiled. I was polite. I made the food they liked when they visited. I remembered their birthdays. None of that mattered. I was never going to be what they wanted. I understood that. What I didn't understand was what they were going to do about it. Gracie's 7th birthday fell on a Saturday in March. We planned a small party. Not elaborate, just close family. A cake, balloons, a trip to the little botanical garden she loved because she was obsessed with flowers and had been since she was 3 years old. We'd sent the invitations 4 weeks out. My mother-in-law confirmed. My father-in-law confirmed. My sister-in-law confirmed with a little note about how she'd bring Gracie's favorite sparkling juice. The day before the party, my ex-husband came home with a look on his face I recognized. The look of someone who has news and has been practicing how to deliver it. His parents had gotten tickets to a charity gala, black tie, in the city. They'd had the tickets for weeks, apparently. His sister was going with her husband. It was a conflict, he said. These things happen, he said. Gracie would understand, he said. She was 7, and 7-year-olds were resilient. Did they just forget to tell us, I asked? Or did they decide this was fine and not tell us? He didn't answer that. I sat with it. I did the math. 4 weeks of confirmed plans. A gala with tickets they'd had for weeks. Someone in that family had looked at both dates and made a choice, and the choice was that a charity dinner, the kind where you dress up and get photographed and feel important, mattered more than my daughter's 7th birthday. That night, Gracie helped me tie ribbons on the favor bags. She had these little stickers she'd picked herself, small pressed flower designs. She put one on every single bag, slowly and carefully, asking me every few minutes if they were straight. At one point she looked up and said, "Grammy's going to love this one, right? Because it has a violet. She likes purple." I said yes. Grammy was going to love it. I did not sleep that night. The party happened. A few of her school friends came. My own mother drove 3 hours to be there. My cousin brought her kids. Gracie laughed so hard at one point that she fell off her chair, and we all laughed with her, and she had chocolate frosting on her ear for 20 minutes before anyone noticed. But around 2 in the afternoon, she got quiet. She'd been glancing at the door every few minutes, the way kids do when they're expecting someone. Finally, she came and stood next to me and said very quietly, "So the other kids wouldn't hear, did they forget Mommy?" I pulled her in and held her. I said Grammy and Grandpa had something they couldn't get out of, and that they loved her very much, and that we'd celebrate again with them another time. She nodded against my shoulder. She didn't ask again. She didn't ask again. She didn't ask again. That's the part that stayed with me. She was 7 years old and she already knew not to push it. The next morning, a card arrived in the mail. A generic birthday card with a $50 bill tucked inside. No note. Just a card signed by 4 people who had chosen a gala over my daughter's birthday and couldn't even be bothered to write a sentence about it. I put the card in a drawer. 2 days later, my ex-husband sat me down and said he thought we should talk about the direction things were going. And I knew, the way you know when the last door in the house finally stops closing right, that the conversation we were about to have had been building for a long time, and that other people had probably been having it with him before he had it with me. We separated in April. Filed in June. What came next was the part nobody prepares you for, not the divorce itself, but the performance around it. My mother-in-law called me twice, not to ask how I was, not to ask about Gracie, to ask me to consider what I was doing to the family, to ask me to think about how this would look at Christmas, to remind me, gently, that my ex-husband was a good man who had made some mistakes, and that good women stood by good men. I listened. I said, I understood. I ended the call. My ex-husband's attorney sent over an initial proposal that was, and I want to be precise here, creative. It proposed a custody arrangement in which Gracie would spend the majority of her time with her father and I would have every other weekend, plus certain holidays. It cited my work schedule. It cited my emotional unavailability during the marriage, a phrase that I read 3 times because I wanted to make sure I was understanding it correctly. It proposed child support at a number so low it would not have covered her monthly school supplies. I looked at that proposal for a long time. I thought about the drawer where I'd put that birthday card. Then I called my attorney. My attorney was a woman named, well, I'll just say she was someone who had been doing family law for 22 years and had a reputation in the local legal community that I can only describe as formidable. When I explained what the proposal said, she didn't react with outrage. She just made a note and said, "Okay, let's show them who they're dealing with. Here is what they did not know about me." What they could not have known if they'd been paying attention. 3 months before my husband and I separated, I had been quietly engaged by a company to review a set of internal contracts. It was a significant engagement, a Fortune 500 subsidiary, with a problem they didn't want aired publicly. I'd found what they were looking for in 6 weeks. The settlement that followed was substantial, and my fee structure included a percentage clause I negotiated 2 years earlier when I started taking on larger clients. I was not wealthy. I was not a billionaire. But I was not what they thought I was either. I was a woman who had spent 9 years being underestimated by that family and who had spent those same 9 years building something they didn't know existed. My attorney filed our counter-proposal on a Tuesday. By Thursday, the other side had called to request a meeting. The meeting was at the courthouse in a small conference room off the main corridor. My ex-husband was there. His attorney was there. My mother-in-law had apparently insisted on attending as emotional support, which his attorney had allowed, which told me something about his attorney's judgment. I came in last. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. My mother-in-law looked at me with that particular expression she had, the one that was almost sympathetic, the one that said, "Poor thing, she doesn't know what she's walking into." She'd worn that expression at our wedding rehearsal dinner. She'd worn it when I came home from the hospital with Gracie. She'd worn it every holiday for 9 years. My ex-husband's attorney opened by saying they wanted to find a solution that was best for Gracie. He said this while not looking at me. He said they understood I had concerns about the custody proposal and that there was room to discuss adjustments. My attorney put a folder on the table. "We're not here to discuss adjustments," she said. "We're here to discuss a complete counterproposal which includes full primary custody, child support calculated at the statutory maximum based on current income, retroactive from the date of separation, and a request for the court to review the initial proposal's characterization of my client's involvement as a parent." Silence. My ex-husband's attorney picked up the folder. He opened it. He read for a moment. He turned to the next page. His expression shifted in a way I found satisfying. My mother-in-law leaned toward him and said something in a low voice. He held up one finger without looking at her. "There's documentation here from a federal court filing," he said. "Yes," my attorney said. "What was in that folder?" "My professional history, including the engagement I'd completed the previous year, the scope of work, the publicly available portions of the case record, and 3 professional references who each had, coincidentally, offered to speak to my character and capacity as a professional and as a parent. Also in that folder, a detailed accounting of every confirmed and canceled plan my in-laws had made with Gracie over the preceding 18 months, including the birthday. Including the Christmas 2 years ago when they'd arrived 2 hours late and left before dinner because they had another engagement. Including the spring recital they'd skipped entirely. I had written it all down. I had written it all down because I am someone who writes things down. It is what I do. My mother-in-law was looking at me differently now. My ex-husband's attorney asked for a recess. We settled 3 weeks later. Primary custody with me. Child support calculated fairly. The birthday incident doesn't appear anywhere in the legal record, but we all know it's there, between every line. My ex-husband and I have found something that I can only call a functional piece. He sees Gracie on his scheduled weekends. He shows up on time. He has, in the past several months, been more present than he was in the last 2 years of our marriage, which is something Gracie deserves from him. And I'm not going to stand in the way of that. His parents sent another card when the settlement was finalized. No money this time, just a note that said they hoped we could move forward together as a family for Gracie's sake. I read it. I put it in the drawer with the birthday card. Maybe someday I'll throw them both away. I'm not there yet. Some things you keep for a while just to remind yourself what you walked out of. On Gracie's next birthday, we went back to the botanical garden. Just the 2 of us this time, which is what she asked for. She wore her yellow rain boots even though it wasn't raining because she said they made her feel like she could walk through anything. She pressed her face close to a display of early spring flowers, small white ones, the kind that come up when everything else is still frozen, and she stayed there for a long moment just looking at them. "They come back every year," she told me, explaining it like I might not know, even when it was cold. They were there the whole time. I crouched down next to her and looked at the flowers and said, "Yeah, I know. That's exactly how it works." She took my hand and we walked the whole garden twice, and I bought her a hot chocolate with extra whipped cream, and she talked for 20 minutes straight about a book she was reading, and I listened to every word. That was the day I understood I hadn't just walked out of something. I had walked into something. Quieter, smaller, mine, and I wasn't the scapegoat anymore. I was just her mom, which is the only thing I ever wanted to be.